Disintegration of the Western Roman Empire. Valerie E., Nika Cooper, Dominic L., Alex Anukwu. From 27 BCE to 180 CE, the Roman Empire was thriving. It had a reliable army, it was politically stable and economically integrating, and there was an increase in urbanization. But in the 3rd century, everything changed. Constant war and invasions from Germanic tribesmen, or barbarians, had ruined agricultural progress and disrupted trade, commerce, and production. There was a crippling inflation, travel was dangerous. Solutions developed in the 4th century to fix the problems only added to them. The Roman Empire was beginning to fall. It was up to Diocletian to try to fix the aftermaths of the chaos of the 3rd century.
To better rule over Rome, he split the empire into 2 halves, the East and the West. Although both of these halves have to face the same types of internal weaknesses, they were not the major reasons that Rome actually fell. Both empires were prone to the same types of diseases, worn-out soil, tax inflation, and much more. However, as grave as these might sound, they were not the true reasons that Rome actually fell, because the Eastern Empire lasted past the 5th century and much longer than the Western Empire did. The Eastern Roman Empire was considered better off than the Western Empire. The East was much richer and more powerful than the West, and it had better trade because it was located next to richer nations such as Egypt and Syria, which enriched the economy. They possessed so much wealth and power that they could afford things that their Western counterpart couldn't. They could afford more troops and buy off Germanic tribesmen so they wouldn't have to fight them. Additionally, the Eastern Empire was less dependent on the Western Empire, who were in shackles. While the East was thriving, the West was slowly dying off. Without the financial support of the East, or their strategic and relatively safe location, which protected them from a majority of barbarian attacks, they were sitting ducks. The East had the Caucasus Mountains and the Black Sea to protect them, while the West was wide open to attack with no geographical protection. Furthermore, the East had the ability to maintain political peace because they could focus more on diplomacy. On the other side of the spectrum, the Western Empire fell into political chaos and everyone was turning on each other, and external threats caused the Western Empire to fall before the Eastern Empire.
However, another reason the West was so badly off in the first place was because of Rome's economy, which faced a huge decline in the 3rd to 4th century. While it had previously flourished because of the economic return from expansion, once Rome stopped conquering at such a high rate, they had to depend on surplus. When they ran out of surpluses, Rome raised taxes, but those were barely sufficient. A problem quickly arose. There were not enough precious metals to create the amount of coins needed. In an attempt to solve it, Rome debased the coins and started down a slope that helped hurry in the end of the empire. It began to be extreme under Septimius Severus, when the silver content in the denarius dropped to 50%. The content of actual precious metals in coins continued to drop rapidly, leading to inflation. On top of that, the inflation wages lagged behind the new prices of everything, adding to the economic disaster. Taxation in Rome was very high, and, because of the constant debasing of coins, difficult to keep up with for many poorer folk. This resulted in parents being forced to sell their children into slavery or prostitution to get the money. However, despite the shortage of coins, inflation, and high taxes, money didn't disappear from the economy. Instead, 2 different economies appeared, one for the rich and one for the poor. The poor people were getting their wages in debased coinage, while the rich in gold, non-debased coins. Therefore, the poor people could only buy necessities and 1 or 2 extra stuff, no luxuries, while the rich people could buy whatever luxury they wished. In this type of environment, large landowners thrived. They put their money into the land, and the poor folk who couldn't deal with the burden of taxes and the inflation fled to work for the landowners as tenant farmers, though as the century went on, they became serfs or slaves instead. More about that later. The power of the landowners steadily grew as they produced for their towns' markets, and eventually they revolted against the emperors. This weakened the central authority, which in turn contributed to the fall of both Rome's economy and the Roman Western Empire.
On a related note, there were other ways the large landowner system hurt the economy and, in turn, the Roman Empire. Independent farmers, family farmers who had inherited pieces of land from their ancestors, were being replaced by large landowners. Thus, these farmers were losing their land. Like stated earlier, this made these farmers be forced to obtain jobs from the large landowners, becoming coloni, or tenant farmers. As time went on, these peasant farmers turned tenant farmers were beginning to lose their freedom. The government was passing more and more laws that bound the farmers to large landowners. This could have indirectly hurt the economy of big cities, which relied on tradesmen and manufacturers to find markets that were becoming less common. After some time, the agrarian sector could not support the rest of the population. High taxes and other factors made the number of peasant farmers decrease, which in turn created less produce. The question is, how did this happen? How did wealthy people gain so much land? During the late Republic, Rome conquered a lot of new land. The Roman government created new policies which gave wealthy people power over the newly conquered land. These new policies also made peasant farmers poorer and it took away their freedom, as mentioned earlier. The government, who was supporting the large landowners, made harsh new laws to keep the freedom away from the people in this colonized system. One law stated, tenants should be considered as slaves of the land itself to which they are born, and shall have no right of going off where they like or changing their place. But the landowner shall enjoy his right over them with the care of a parent and the power of a master. So the tenant farmers turned serfs indirectly hurt the economy, which in turn hurt the Western Empire.
Over time, the Roman military grew weaker and weaker due to factors such as the decreasing population, a weakening economy, the barbarization of the military, and reforms made by Diocletian. In Rome in the 3rd century, the coinage was debased. This caused many problems to the Roman army. As the Roman currency was basically worthless, Rome eventually had less and less money to pay soldiers. As less soldiers were being hired, the army grew weaker. Rome resulted in hiring the neighboring Germanic tribesmen. This was a bad idea for several reasons, and Rome knew it. However, they really had no choice. As the Germanic tribesmen refused to participate in the strict training and discipline of the past armies, the army was weaker as a whole. The lack of Roman soldiers was also caused, in part, by the depopulation in the Western Roman Empire. This depopulation was caused by many plagues and wars, as well as other factors. On a side note, the depopulation also caused the farming population to decline, leading to less tax income. This meant even less money for soldiers. Diocletian, a Roman emperor, also made several changes to the military that weakened it. He split up the army into 2 groups, a frontier militia, which protected the borders, and mobile legions, which could move around and protect against rebellions. This was to protect against outside attackers and inside rebellions. However, this meant that all of the army was never fighting at once, making all areas weaker. Diocletian also lowered the number of soldiers serving under each general. He did this to prevent any one general from having too much power, but it just caused incoordination and less teamwork between the armies. In the long term, Diocletian's reforms caused more harm than they did good. With the population declining, less and less soldiers could be provided or hired. Thus, even more Germanic tribesmen were brought in, causing Western Rome's army to become weaker and weaker, from both the inside and the out. These problems, along with the problems resulting from Diocletian's.
Rome was a powerful empire, yet, like most empires, it eventually fell. Rome gradually grew weaker and weaker as more time went by, for reasons having to do with how it stood economically, how the army was holding up, and how the separation of the East and the West impacted it. The Western Roman Empire eventually disintegrated. A very big factor in the fall largely had to do with landowners gaining a lot of support from the government, and also eventually gaining a lot of power themselves. This can easily be compared to the fall of other empires. Similarly to the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire's ruler grew weaker as their serfs grew stronger, and they faced similar economic problems as well. China's central authority also grew weak as their generals and local elites grew stronger, which resulted in rebellions, making the empire fall. The Western Roman Empire, much like other empires listed, suffered from economic and military problems that its eastern counterpart didn't, and eventually led to a weakened central authority, rebellions, and the fall of the empire.
URLs. We're excited.